You know, they say, boy, he's on the Tonight Show, he's on his way. No. On the Tonight Show, nothing happened.
Oh.
Nothing happened except they could put it in the ad when I went to Allentown, as seen on the Tonight Show. Cool. The Allentowns were still out there, and someone had to do them. So I continued to work from the momentum from Burns and Cariln breaking up. I had contracts at the Playboy clubs that Burns and Cariln hadn't fulfilled that I took over. One of them included being on Playboy After Dark. I think that was the first incarnation of Hef's show was called Playboy After Dark. Later on, I think it was called Playboy Penthouse. Mm-hmm. I was on that first one. I have a kinescope of that somewhere. And I just drifted. And I finally ran out of the Burns and Cariln momentum. And I'm going to Indianapolis to work at the Embers with Ann Richards, which is a good job and a great club. But who understood me in Indianapolis in the 1960s? No one. No one. I can remember people just sitting there like this in a nightclub. I can remember awful times when you're not known and when you're doing something, quote unquote, a little avant-garde, a little bit in a new direction, let's say. They don't, most run-of-the-mill, rank-and-file citizens didn't know, didn't care, didn't understand. There was a touch of irreverence in it, and I'm sure that was off-putting. I can remember doing the supper show. That means there are still dishes on the table. There are still coffee cups being placed down on saucers. There are spoons and forks dropping onto plates. And I can remember in the stone silence practically having to do 25 minutes. And the only reason you don't lose heart is because you remember the good nights. You say, well, I understand why this is happening here, now. I'll just remember the good nights. And that was part of the seed was being planted in me that I was in the wrong places, doing the wrong things. But I did hold on, and I didn't want to keep going to Indianapolis and spending the whole week's pay getting there and back and having a little, what they call an efficiency apartment for a week, or something where you could keep something cold. So I said to my wife, and we had an infant baby, I said, I've got to take a stand in New York. I've got to take a stand and get on the Merv Griffin show. I've got to do television here. And it means I have to go somewhere to clubs to work out. I have to figure this out. There were no comedy clubs. There were only coffee houses. Coffee houses had hootenannies. Hootenannies were once a week when the coffee house didn't have its usual folk singer or two, and they had an open mic, as it were, amateur night. But people who were somewhat accomplished, people with a leg up professionally. And I started doing that. I did 2 of those. And the owner of a club saw me and he says, I want you over in the Cafe Au Go-Go. I spent 2 years there, working sometimes 2 nights a week, sometimes 1, sometimes a week, sometimes a month off, sometimes 3 weeks off, sometimes 4 weeks in a row, sometimes opening for somebody, sometimes being the only person, sometimes getting $5, sometimes getting just a hamburger, sometimes getting $50, sometimes getting $100 for 2 nights on the weekend because I was opening for someone. And I was spotty. It wasn't regular, but it was there, and it was definite, and it was a gymnasium, and it was a laboratory for me. It was a place to work on my television bit that I needed a bit to get onto TV. Merv Griffin was my best bet. I honed this piece called The Indian Sergeant, and Richard Pryor worked in this place with me. Pryor and I were both unknown at the same time in the Cafe Au Go-Go years, during the Cafe Au Go-Go years. He was perfecting his Rumpelstiltskin bit, which was his passport to television. Both of us obviously are still in our early undeveloped stages, short hair, suit and ties, mainstream comedy, call it. And he was like a step ahead of me in terms of, we're both working there sporadically, occasionally on the same night. And he got an interview with the Merv Griffin people. And then he went for his interview and he was given a date. And while he was waiting to do his first appearance, they came in to see me. So I got an appointment. Then he did his first show, then I got an interview, and I got a date. And then once he did one, they gave him some more, and I got my first one. Now, what happened on Merv Griffin was very, very important to my development. First of all, it not only opened the door for television for me, Merv loved me. I did the Indian Sergeant. It was a great bit. It's a fish out of water routine, which is about how a first sergeant in the movies, these kind of guys, over here, all right, everybody, move them tanks out, get those troops over there. You guys, more ammo, one of those guys, how he would be if he lived in Indian days. And it was about the Indian sergeant. And it was very clever, both fish out of water, easy to write. I killed on Merv with it, and Merv's, immediately they gave me 3 more. Now, I had a few things in my act down at the Cafe Au Go-Go that I learned, I figured, well, I can engineer them. So I had no more material. All I had was the Indian bit. I got on Merv Griffin and I killed, and they gave me 3 more dates. And I was in a semi-panic because I didn't have any other thing like that, like the Indian Sergeant, to do. But I had pieces in my show, spoofs on daytime television, spoofs on the newscaster and the disc jockey, and I figured, well, I can pull them together. The first thing I did, I was smart. First thing I did was tell the producer, Bob Shanks, I said, Bob, I want you to have Merv ask me on to do the Indian Sergeant again because he liked it so much. So that got me past the first one of the 3. It was clever. And he did. He said, yes, that's fine. And Merv loved it enough to do that. So I did it. The second show, I did that again. And he went through, all disclaimers came from him. I didn't have to say a word about it. Then for the next one, I had pieced together some things, and I did the 3 shows. And then they gave me 13 more. Well, you don't walk away from 13 dates when you've been in Indianapolis staring at coffee cups. So I had to accept, naturally I accepted them. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? And meantime, the Mike Douglas show was on the same syndicated network as Merv, Westinghouse syndicated television. They both went all around the country, but they weren't networked. They weren't on simultaneously around the country. They weren't on at different time zones and different places and everything. So I was starting to do the Mike Douglas shows. Everything I did on Merv, I did on Mike Douglas. I did the Indian Sergeant first. I asked them to have me back and do it again. Then I did the Wonderful Wino, the disc jockey. That was the next thing up, I think. Then I did my newscast. Now what happens is this. I found out I had to start writing stuff at a very fast rate, which I'd never had to do. So I would go down. We lived on the 6th floor, Brenda and Kelly and I, on the 6th floor of the apartment building in a small apartment. And I would go down to my mother's apartment where I had grown up in the same building while she was at work. And I would sit at the kitchen table and I would write. And it was all longhand. I didn't use a typewriter. God knows there were no computers. Everything was longhand, and I would write things, and I would write things, I would write them. And I came up with the Indian Sergeant. I said, okay, I'll do an Indian Columbus on Columbus's ship. Same premise, but now you just do all maritime and pirate and seaworthy stuff. You just do the jokes, different jokes. And it was easy. And then I did the disc jockey. Then I did realize I had a newscast, news, sports, and weather. The newscaster, the weatherman was Al Sleet, the hippy-dippy weatherman, and the sports. And I realized they didn't have to memorize this stuff because a newscaster sits with a script. So I had my stuff, and I would do the newsman, and I'd have him look down, and I knew the story well enough to just get a reminder. Okay, this is about the 2 people in the park. Yeah, okay, I know that, and I just used the pad, just do that. And I wrote the News, Sports, and Weather, Volume 2. And then Volume 3, they were just new generations of good stuff too, good jokes. Same with the disc jockey. I did a second version of him. Then I'm back to the Indian. They say, ask me to do the Indian again. And I do the Indian. So patchwork, and I had to learn how to write on demand. And I didn't try anything out anywhere. I just did things straight to television. I did not, there were a lot of people who say, I'm in the clubs, I'm working on a piece for television. I mean, these are guys that already had done television. They said, I'm doing a piece for TV, I'm working on a piece. Trying it out in the clubs. And I was working the opposite. I would do something on television and then put it in my club act. If it worked on television, well, it's got to work in the club too. So it was the strangest period. 1965, 66, well, 66 is another turning point. But 65 was loaded with Mervs and Mike Douglases.